Murderers, rapists, and child sex offenders roam our streets and commit heinous crimes. Once arrested, they often are back on the streets. What's going on with our judicial system? It's bad enough that low-life criminals terrorize our communities. What's even worse are the liberal judges who let them back on our streets time and time again to continue their life of crime. Andy Kahan joined Crime Stoppers of Houston in 2018 as its first ever director of victim services and advocacy. Crime Stoppers is a statewide program to represent the victims of crime. Andy, you have been fighting for victims' rights for decades now, and I've known you through a lot of these fights. We've been in the trenches together. But you've worked for pretty much every mayor in Houston for the last 3 or 4 decades. How have you managed to continue in your position that no one came in and said, well, we need our own people?
Dan, I'm considered the modern day Maximus from Gladiator. I just won't die. I was the first victim advocate in the country to ever be appointed, and that was by Mayor Bob Lanier. And I give Bob Lanier a lot of credit because what a vision he had. And they looked at me and said, well, we have no idea what you're supposed to do because no other city in the country had this. So I was given a very unique opportunity. They couldn't put a manual in front of you and said, read the manual, call New York, LA, Chicago. So I was given an incredibly long leash to attack these issues. And when you advocate on behalf of one faction, which I do, you will generally infuriate the other faction, and that just comes with the territory. And a great example was, you know how they have mayor's press conferences?
Yes.
So Mayor Lanier had a press conference, and a reporter asked Mayor Lanier about something that I might have said or done that might have offended someone, which I really can't imagine me
not
offending anyone.
Yes.
But Mayor Lanier gave one of the greatest retorts that I used 30 years later. He turned to the reporter and he said, look, I don't expect Mr. Kahan to please the criminal element, and that's what I do.
Yeah, you're after them day after day, year after year, and you probably have done more for the victims of crime than anyone in the country. So thanks for being with us. I want to get into the heart of this, and we'll talk about Crime Stoppers in a little bit as well, because you're also the first ever victims person on Crime Stoppers, which I support and have been involved in. It's a great organization across the state as well. So, Andy, how is it today that people who commit murders and rape women and they're child sex offenders get arrested, police doing great work, they arrest them, and they're back on the street? What's happened?
You had a philosophical change, and basically the change happened probably roughly around 2018, and we started noticing this trend when I started looking at individuals that were charged with murder in Harris County, and I started noticing something very disturbing. A lot of them were out on more than one felony bond, or they were out on what's called a PR, personal recognizance, better known in street terms as a get-out-of-jail-free card. And I started documenting these cases. And we eventually got up to over 200 of our citizens that I say, you know, this was tragic, but it was so utterly preventable. In Harris County, there used to be a motto called one bond per customer. If you were out on bond and you were charged with another offense, especially felony, you weren't getting back out again. And that changed. We started seeing defendants with 5, 6, 7. We had one guy that was on 12 bonds for aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon. And one of our local reporters asked the judge, when is enough? And the judge said, well, I don't have a choice. I have to give him a bond. And we're going, no, you do have a choice. You can revoke the bond. And that's where we started putting out pressure. We started documenting these cases. We started letting the public know, and that led to a series of legislative laws that it was a tough road, as you well know. It was not easy. And in 2021, thanks to State Senator Joan Huffman, we ended up passing Senate Bill 6. The way I look at it, when we were testifying in favor of the bill, there were 10 of us. 7 from Crime Stoppers. The opposition had over 80 entities and organizations
Representing
testifying,
criminals.
representing all sorts of civil rights, prisoner rights,
At the end of
defendants'
the day,
rights.
they were trying to protect the criminals.
Exactly. And so, and I tell you what, Dan, I respect the opposition. I'm going to tell you why. They're organized, they're well-funded, and they show up in droves. And we still struggle today to get people out there supporting the types of bills that we want passed to enhance public safety and victims' rights.
So Senate Bill 6, one of my priorities that year, and Joan Huffman, Senator Huffman, who was a former criminal court judge, prosecutor, has done great work for us. But despite all of that, Andy, we still have this mindset on our bench, not just in Houston and Harris County, across the state, across the country, of not looking out for the victim anymore. And some of these cases and we're going to talk about some of these cases, the listeners or the viewers, depending how they're watching this podcast or listening, are going to be stunned about some of these cases. Is it just simply a view from the left? And I don't want to make it political, but it seems to be political that the left has a different view. They're not tough on crime, and they want to continue to give hardened criminals one more chance to go out and commit one more crime. How can a judge, Andy, sit there for a person who's committed murder and give them the right to go back out on the street?
You know, Dan, it's a tough question to answer, but one thing we have seen, particularly in Harris County, and one good thing has come about is we've seen a lot of positive changes. But going back to when we first started noticing and started documenting this, it was a whirlwind of people that were getting repeatedly released on bond after bond after bond, and then people ended up paying the ultimate price, losing their life. So you had a philosophical difference, and you had in the courts that had a magic changeover in 2018, call it like it is. And I get asked all the time, how come you weren't talking about this before? And I just say, because it wasn't happening before.
Right, never happened before.
And if it was happening before, I would be talking about it.
Yeah. In the old days, 10 years ago, a decade or so ago, not that old, if someone committed a heinous crime and they were out, they had one shot, as you said, one bond, and they're back in jail for a long time. And today they just go literally right out on the street.
We've seen defendants charged with capital. It was almost unheard of to get a bond and get released on capital murder, and bonds as low as $50,000 for a capital murder in which you're actually eligible for the death penalty to be released. And we've seen a lot of those never show back up in court. And we just did a segment again on 3 capital murder defendants who were released on bonds who were wanted fugitives. And that never happened before.
Where does that come from, Andy? You've been looking at this a long time. Where do these, and these are Democrat judges for the most part. I would think, though, that even a Democrat judge would know. I understand them maybe wanting to be lighter on crimes dealing with drugs. Not that they should be, but I can understand them low-level crimes. But to let a rapist or a child sex offender or a murderer back out, how do they justify it? What do they say on the bench?
Well, basically, bail is a constitutional right, and I get that. Yeah. And you remember what in Jocelyn Nungary, there was the horrific sexual assault, murder, kidnapping, and people were upset that the 2 defendants got a bond, albeit a very, very high bond. And I told everybody here, guess what? The judge had no choice, because by the Constitution, you had to give a bond. And luckily, this past session, we finally ended up passing a constitutional amendment which gave judges discretion. That was the key word. I always thought judges should have the discretion. That way they can't fall back and say, I had to give a bond. Now you have a choice. And thankfully in Harris County, we're seeing a lot of Prop 3 that is being in effect. And people that used to get out on bond on these horrific charges are no longer getting out.
So Prop 3 that the people overwhelmingly passed, because whether you're a Democrat or Republican, independent, it doesn't matter, liberal or conservative, people want safe neighborhoods. They want their families protected. They want to live in safety. And so the people have spoken up, but we still have judges going the other direction and letting these people out. Talk about some of these cases.
Yes, and that's where I want to go into, Lieutenant Governor.
Yeah, Dan's good.
Dan is good.
We've known each other a long time.
I know. Stickler for these titles.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
So one of the things that I started noticing were defendants who were out on bond, then were given probation, and then violated the terms of their conditions of probation by getting charged with another offense, a felony. A motion to revoke probation is filed, and most of the time they're not being granted. And I'll give you a great example, and this just happened a little over a month ago in Harris County, and the case got national attention. Louis Uribe's son was carjacked, and he ended up trying to find his son's car, and he ends up getting shot and killed by a defendant. This defendant had been to TDCJ, big boy prison, multiple times. He was out on probation for assault with intent to impede breathing, was just basically a fancy word for trying to strangle somebody to death. While out on probation, he violates the terms of his conditions repeatedly. One of them, he actually goes to the state of Louisiana, which you're not supposed to do. You're not supposed to travel without permission. He gets charged with 4 felonies. One of them, he was charged, and I've never seen this before, with attempting to deliver drugs into a federal correctional facility. So a motion to revoke his probation is filed based on being charged with 4 felonies in Louisiana. The judge dismissed the motion to revoke probation and gave him 30 days in the county jail, which he already served 13, waiting disposition on the motion to revoke, meaning he only had to do 2 days, and then he's released. Months later, he's convicted in Louisiana. So now you got convictions while on probation in the state of Texas. That's not enough to revoke your probation. So now he's on probation in Harris County, and he's on probation in Louisiana, and then now he's charged with murder, 2 counts of aggravated robbery. Why bother having conditions of probation if you're not going to enforce them? And this is not an anomaly. This is par for the course. And I brought this to your attention months ago because we had a similar situation involving a case out of Dallas in which a defendant was out on probation and goes to North Carolina and gets charged with 3 sexual offenses in North Carolina. They don't revoke his probation. They allow him to remain on probation. So now he's on probation. He's out on bond in North Carolina. And now he's charged with kidnap and sexual assault of a 12-year-old girl in Galveston. None of this should have ever happened.
Yeah, that's the tragedy, Andy, to me, is it's tragic the first time a criminal takes someone's life or rapes a woman that will be with her for her whole life, or sexually assaults a child, or other, kidnapping, carjacking, something that is just traumatic and life-changing for the victim. But the fact that these same people do it again, those crimes should never have happened.
No, and I'll tell you, Dan,
they should be in jail for the rest of their life or for 10, 20, 30 years.
As much as you want to blame the offender, and obviously they deserve I blame our system even more because they knew what they had in front of them. You had career habitual offenders that were given chance after chance after chance, and the only time they weren't committing crimes was when they were locked up.
When they were locked up.
That's what we call the gap years. When you see a gap year, it's because they're in prison or they're doing time somewhere else, and they can't commit crimes. But our system keeps allowing them back on the streets.
So I want to go back so our listeners and viewers really can get their arms around this. You said it changed pretty much around 2018. That change has swamped the system now, allowing criminals out on the streets. We passed a constitutional amendment, again on the bond issue, to give the judges discretion to keep more bad actors behind bars. But what do we do? It's not just a Houston problem or a Harris County problem or a Texas problem. It's a national problem to get this genie back in the bottle. Is it a matter of elections? Is it a matter of federal law, more state law? What is it that will turn this around? Because we have this whole mindset now of criminal justice reform that has gotten way out of control.
It's a myriad of different issues, and one way to look at it, of course, elections matter.
They do.
But I also think getting these issues out to the public. And look, I'm going to tout Crime Stoppers because we're the only entity in the country that I'm aware of that's actually documenting
yes,
cases.
You've done an incredible job.
No one else is doing it.
Yeah. I want to go back to something you said because we've talked a lot of stats here. I want to go back to something you said earlier so people get this. There were several hundred murders committed by people who had already committed a murder or other felony.
A combination.
Yes.
Combination. These weren't one-offs.
Right.
One of the most tragic cases that I ever dealt with was 80-year-old grandmother Rosalie Cook. I mean, she's in Meyerland walking out of Walgreens in a parking lot and ends up getting stabbed to death by a career habitual criminal who had over 60 arrests and convictions, and that's just in Harris County. And he was deemed incompetent at one time to stand trial and then miraculously restored to competency and told to go live in this assisted living facility, which is basically a residential home in neighborhoods. Only neighborhoods aren't told you got 5, 6, sometimes 10 offenders, including sex offenders, that are living amongst you. And he walks out for 2 weeks. He was basically a fugitive. Nobody reported him. And then he ends up killing Rosalie Cook. Cases like that are so disturbing to me. And this has happened 5 years ago, and I'm seeing it again because we just did another report on defendants who were restored to competency, told to go live in this house, and are now wanted fugitives as well.
Yeah, this is a whole movement pushed in large part by George Soros because he funds them. And in some of these cases where bail was set, you have these national groups that come in and pay the bail, and we've addressed that in Texas as well. And again, for viewers and listeners, this has all happened so quickly, and we're catching up and trying to stay ahead of the curve and do better than anyone else in the country. But elections do matter, and I'm not doing this show to make a political point. I'm doing this show for people to be aware of how bad the judges are that we have in Houston, in Dallas, across the state, in blue counties for the most part. Let me tell you what, this doesn't happen in Lubbock, Texas. This doesn't happen in our red rural counties. This just doesn't happen. In fact, I was talking to the speaker, Speaker Burrows, who's from Lubbock, and when I was telling him how many people in Harris County who commit serious crimes, murder in some cases, and let out, just shocked. People in law and order red counties and cities see this and they just I can't believe it's happening.
No, and it is happening, and that's why we started documenting cases like this, because you wouldn't believe it.
Yes.
Because I've been in the system for 40 some odd years, Dan, and I've seen it all. And I was back in the early 90s when we had the revolving door at the prison because we had a severe prison overcrowding crisis, and inmates were only serving 1 month for every year they were in. So I've been around, and I hadn't seen what I've seen in over 30 years, and still we started taking a look at the revolving door at the courthouse. And that's played a significant role when we had our increased crime, particularly from 21 through 24 as well. But I will share, because there's always good things.
There's some good news.
And it is. Our numbers that I have started documenting on defendants charged with murder while out on more than one felony bond or PR bond have plummeted. So I do believe that the courts in Harris County have gotten the message. And it's rare in this right now that I actually see cases out on bond that are charged with murder anymore. So that's good, what we did.
Yeah, and that's through legislation we passed.
Correct.
And also focusing on these judges and putting pressure on them. There's still some who are going to let everyone out because
you look what's going on in Travis County.
Yes,
I mean,
Travis County, Austin is a disaster.
Yeah, I mean, I was on, I believe it was a Newsmax a couple of weeks ago, talking about a guy that's now charged with multiple felonies, including a sexual assault and kidnapping of UT students. And this guy had 30 some odd arrests since 2013, numerous convictions for indecent exposure. He's a registered sex offender, and he's never spent a day in prison. They kept reducing charges to misdemeanors. He's put on 5 years deferred adjudication, which again, how are you giving someone deferred adjudication who has umpteen amount of convictions? Deferred adjudication was mainly meant for offenders who hadn't been convicted, to give them an opportunity to get their act straight so they don't have a criminal record. You don't give deferred adjudication for someone who has 13 prior convictions. Yet this particular individual, Octavius Brown, was given deferred adjudication. And now you've got young students that are traumatized for life because of a reluctance to send career habitual offenders to prison.
Yeah, I've been going to Austin now since I was first elected on a regular basis every other year for session since 2007. And when I go back and I think about 2007 and 9 and 11, I felt Austin was a relatively safe town. The murder rate was very low. The crime rate was pretty low. I felt like I could, walk from my apartment to a restaurant by myself, even if it was 9 or 10 o'clock at night. I didn't worry about it. I felt that, if I had my wife with me, I wasn't putting her in danger. But no more. No more. Austin's a very dangerous town. And I tell my female staff particularly, don't walk alone. Be wary of the garages, the apartment. We had a witness, Andy, last session or the session before, 2 sessions ago. She had testified on a bill, and she left the Capitol and walked several blocks and was raped in the garage. Those things didn't happen before, but since the Austin City Council and their DAs, or weak DAs, I would call them socialist DAs, since they've taken over, they've defunded the police. There are not enough police to patrol. We've had to put state troopers in there time and time again. And when we send in like a special squad of state troopers, we clean up the crime. We clean it up. But they continue to let them out of jail. So it really does come down to elections, and people have to be involved. I know it's hard because there's so many judges on the ballot. Most people don't know who they are. Who should I vote for? I will say, and look, Republicans aren't perfect. We're not right all the time. But when it comes to criminal issues, you're voting for a Democrat, you're likely to get a judge who's going to let criminals out on the street. You're voting for a Republican, you're not. And in Harris County, there was this big movement a couple of years ago on the elections here, and some Republicans won seats, but the ones who lost only lost by a couple of thousand votes here or there in a heavily blue county. So it sent a strong message, I think, to the Democrats on the bench that the Democrat voters are turning against them. And again, it goes back to, I don't care who you are, you want to feel safe. You want your kids to be safe. You want your wife to be safe.
Public safety basically should be a nonpartisan issue.
It should be a nonpartisan issue.
It shouldn't matter what you are.
Yes.
But going back to what you were saying, Dan, for criminals, it's risk versus rewards. It's simple economics 101. There's very little risk because even if you are caught and convicted, most of the time you're not going to go to prison. You might do some county jail time. You'll be given probation, and there's a lot of rewards. We continue to enable and condone and coddle criminal conduct. There's no fear anymore, and that's has to
going
change.
to jail. You called it a gap when they don't have any crimes on the records because they're in jail for a short period of time. But for them, it's just a cost of doing business.
Absolutely. One way of looking at it, and I hope we're going to address this upcoming legislative session, is habitual felony theft.
Yes.
Crime Stoppers, we identified in 2025 53 defendants who were charged with 5 or more felony thefts in the same year. One of them had 9 charges. And again, in order to rack up 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 charges, you have to be out here to do it.
Yes.
It just doesn't automatically appear. So what I'm proposing, because the business community is in shambles right now, they're being ravaged. And because defendants know They're not going to go to prison. The maximum is a 2-year state jail, and no one hardly ever goes to state jail. So it's a vicious cycle where we keep letting this. We did a story on one with 37 felony thefts. We did one, we called her the bail bond queen, 23 bonds, all for felony thefts, because you continue to be released, rinse, repeat, and so forth. So we have a statute called continuous family violence, right? We have a statute for continuous sexual abuse of a child. What I'm proposing is we have a continuous felony theft statute for offenders who are charged with, let's say, I'll be generous, I'll be kind, with, let's say, 5 in 1 year, that you get enhanced to at least a 3rd-degree felony with potential prison time. You have to send a message. And right now, the message isn't being sent.
Well, it'll have my total support, and the Senate will get it passed, and I believe the House will get it passed too. These crimes of these, individuals just going into stores and walking out with a handful of clothing or whatever it is, or smash and grab in a jewelry store, whatever it is, they continue to do it. And this has been, again, it's like the latest. It's a new phenomena over the last several years where you just see it wide open and they don't seem to care. And they know that they're caught on a camera. There are cameras everywhere. It doesn't bother them because they know they're still going to get out. And now we have youth gangs that take over streets. That's another new phenomena we have. And we've got to address that. It seems like every time we get our arms around one issue, the criminal element finds another way to go and create chaos.
No, I hate how we classify property crimes as nonviolent, particularly burglary.
Yes.
A burglary is a violent crime waiting to happen. You're just fortunate you weren't home when they broke into your house. Right. But that has to change as well. I hate when the fact that, let's say you have to walk into a Walmart, Target, whatever, and half the aisles are locked up. That shouldn't be the norm. You shouldn't have to live that way, where stores lock up their products because people go in and ravage them without any fear of prosecution or going to jail.
Andy, thank you for your lifetime, literally. You spent your life compiling data, standing up for victims, coming to the legislature, going to courtrooms. I really don't know anyone who knows this topic better than you. And for our listeners and viewers, what would you tell them they can do besides?
Well, I'm gonna give you my mantra
go ahead.
as a victim advocate with Crime Stoppers, and I tell families this all the time. I cannot go back and change what happened to you or your family, but we try to make things better for others to come along, and that way you've achieved a lasting legacy. Taking a negative and turning it into positive action for social change. That's what my mantra is. But I tell people all the time, I said, you've got to get involved. You've got to get engaged. You have to know who your elected officials are. You have to know who represents you. It still boggles my mind to this day when I do presentations and very few people know who represents them at the Capitol. I would encourage your audience, and I'm sure your audience is probably more engaged than most people, but help us. When we have these bills filed, help us. If you can't make it to Austin, fire off comments, fire off emails to your representatives. Help us get the bills passed because they have made a significant difference, and we're going to continue to make a difference this upcoming session.
Yeah, and I'll just close with this, that, again, the Senate has, not because I'm president of the Senate, but we just have a conservative body, and our rules are such that the Democrats can't block any bills, so we push all of this out. And we do have a speaker now who's a conservative who I've been able to work with, and we did a lot of great things. But the House still has a lot of Democrats who stand in the way of all of this on the basis of social justice. And we had a press conference at Crime Stoppers somewhere last year, and I pointed out that I'm not holding back on these Democrats. For example, in Houston, there are people who have died. There are people who have been a victim of a crime because the Democrats have blocked bills that would have protected citizens. And they do it again and again and again. and we can't stand for it. We're in the fight. Andy, thank you. You've always been in the fight. And to everyone listening, watching, get engaged.
Yep.
And remember, every election's important, but judicial elections on the criminal bench are very important.
Yep.
Indeed.
And we've always appreciated your support, as the head of the Senate, and it's a very important working relationship, and we're going to continue to make a difference.
Andy, thank you. Andy has spent most of his adult life looking out for victims of crime. Elections really do matter, particularly when it comes to the judiciary. It's important who we have on the bench. So don't be shocked when you see criminals let out who've already committed a crime if we have the George Soros elected judges or DAs that have that philosophy. Elections are important, particularly when it comes to the judiciary. So be sure the next time it's time to vote on a judge, make sure you get those who are going to be tough on crime and not let the criminals back out on the streets. Thanks for being a part of Lieutenant Dan's podcast. Please share with your friends on all the platforms out there and also subscribe. Thank you. We'll see you on the next time. God bless.